Vale, comencem. Comencem aquest capvespre.
So we're going to begin this afternoon with an introductory music. Welcome back. And then we will have a dialogue led by Joan Boadas, who I'm sure you already know. Is anybody listening to the English channel? Okay, thank you. So he's going to be moderating this. The students are very special, as all students are. And we're going to discuss the topic of these big questions that should be discussed in schools and in families, at home, and that are perhaps not approached. So Joan will lead that and explain. So between 45 minutes to an hour, we'll have the students here, and then we'll have Carlos Fresneda after that. So good afternoon. This is a difficult time of day, but what we want to do is to have a conversation with these young promises. In Finland, they say that democratic educational system needs to be efficient. And here we have these young people, which are our hope, because we haven't done such a good job, actually. So we want to ask them some of those large, big existential questions that really are within us as adults for our whole lives, and that adolescents start to ask themselves also. So I'm going to ask some questions to these young people who soon will be workers, business people, leaders, and hopefully will lead the world better than we have. We have Isabel Fluchard. They're very nervous, which is quite normal, because to sit up here and speak for adults already is quite nerve-wracking. So for us, for these kids as well, they're pretty nervous, but let's be patient with them, and they will speak in different languages. We also have Maria Diaz, Navarro Fortis, Martina, and Claudia. We're going to do something that is often not done in the classroom, which is to ask them about who they are. We're interested in who you are. So tell us in a few words your age, which school you're studying at, and something that can explain your life and who you are. Isabel, for example. Tell us who you are, your age, where you're from. So hello, I'm Elizabeth Fluchard. I'm 13. I would like to be a businesswoman when I grow up. My name is Álvaro Fortis. I'm 16. I study in the center of Palma, and I like sports. Claudia. I'm 14. I study in Madre Alberta School, and I would like to be a surgeon. My name is Caterina. I'm 12. I live in Montuiri, and I go to the Porrera School. My name is Martina. I'm 12, and I study at Belver School. My name is Maria. I'm 14, and I also study at Belver School. So now we know a couple of things more about them. And so our first question for you is, how do you see the world right now? It seems pretty complicated. And as you grow up, what do you think
¿Cómo veo el mundo?
of this world? How do you see the world? Yes, how do you perceive it?
No sé muy bien cómo veo el mundo, pero a mí me da mucho
I'm
miedo
not sure what to say
porque
to that. I'm
estamos
very
cerca del momento
afraid
que nuestra
because
generación
we're very close
sabrá
to
si
the
se ha
moment when our generation
aprendido
will be the
a
leading
responder a las leyes del
generation,
mundo.
the one that will have to
Y luego
deal
pienso
with
que
this world.
creo que ha habido un cambio respecto a
And
otras
I think that there has
generaciones,
been a
pero no creo que sea
change
el cambio que se
regarding other
pretende.
generations,
Creo que
but I
tiene que
don't
ser más
think it's
grande.
the change that is needed. I think it needs to be a bigger change.
Creo que
Would you explain that a bit? What's that big change you're
¿cómo?
talking about?
Un cambio de conciencia.
A change
Creo
of
que hay gente
consciousness.
con muchos
I
prejuicios.
think there are people with many
Hay algunos,
prejudices,
bueno, hay gente que recibe
and
una
I think
educación
there are
que hace
people
que
who
no puedan
receive an
crecer
education
personalmente y no llegan a
that
tener luego
means
ideas propias.
that they never
Yo veo
actually
como gente
have their
que
own
todos tienen que
ideas.
tener sus ideas propias, tienen que
And I think
saber
everyone should think
cuál
for
es el objetivo.
themselves. For
Hay
example, when it
gente que
comes to
dice,
voting, there's
yo
people
voto tal
who
partido
say, I
porque
vote
creo que
this
es la mejor
party because
solución.
that's what's
Porque
always
otros
been
siempre
voted
dicen,
at
yo
home.
voto tal partido porque
Well, I
estoy
think
de
it's
acuerdo con
time
sus
for us to
ideales.
say, I vote for this party because I agree with what they're saying, with their ideals. You know, the young people, they're learning to speak in public. And you can answer each other as well. You can debate with each other. Who would like to speak? How do you see the world? So, how do you see this world now? Is it difficult? Complicated? What do you think, Claudia? I see the world and a bit fucked up, and I apologize for that expression. I think that the future, our generation, is the one who's going to suffer. If we don't do a change now, we're just not going to get there. No one will. And society and all of that, you need to be a certain way in order to fit in. We're very concerned by our image and the environment is something that we have destroyed. It's our home. And if we don't do something immediately, we're just not going to make it. I see the world complicated, but I also see hope in change. Explain the concept of hope. What is the hope? Because we're very interested in this, adults, because there's not much left. I think that people, if they believed in themselves, they would be able to change if they were to say what they think. How do you see the world? I see the world. We have many problems, as Martina has said, in our generation that have not yet been resolved. And I think that if we get organized to do stuff, not talking about doing stuff, but to actually really do what needs to be done, then I think that we will be able to, for our generation and for future generations, create a better world. I see things quite complicated. It's difficult to make things better because with everyone wanting to do, everyone's thinking that's not going to happen to us. But actually, it is going to happen to all of us. And we need to we need to not allow the world to end in 20 years' time. We need to be thinking about the next generations after us. I haven't told you that they come from 4 different schools. We have people from the public school, as in the state school, and 2 different state schools, and a couple of private schools as well, the International College and Madre Alberta School. So we wanted to have a representation of different educational systems here. Now let's go into these large questions that we were talking about earlier. What do you think within yourself about certain issues that concern us all? Your elders, are they different to you? Do you think that they've had a better life or a worse life than you? Do you think you will live better or worse than they? Do you think you will have a better life than them? What's your position on that? Basically, do you think this generation has things more difficult or easier than the previous generations? I think that for us, it's a little bit harder because people didn't used to look at you and criticize you in the way that they do today. Nowadays, people feel the need to criticize on social networks, and that didn't used to exist. I think that everyone has had it difficult. I think they had it hard for other circumstances, but for us perhaps a little bit harder, because what she said about social networks really hurts us, especially those of us who have been using those social networks since a very young age, which actually is wrong. We shouldn't be accessing social networks so young. And people damage you, hurt you with comments that take seconds to write, but years to heal. And we need to spread a message. We need to care for the planet. It's our home, it's our future and the future of our family. So we need to care for the planet. I think that the world is going to change all the same, because everything evolves, everything changes. So challenges that used to be huge are perhaps not as big now. Now there's other different challenges. Martina, you used to live in Mexico, right? So you know America, Mexico, and Europe. Do you notice differences between being a young person in Mexico or in Europe? Yes, because in Mexico there's a lot of social inequality. I think it's harder for people out there. It's not like in rich countries like ours, right? Thank you. I think that both generations have had it difficult. Our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation had it hard because they didn't have as many facilities as we do. Internet can be harmful, but has also provided us with a lot of help in school, or at work, or socially. But for future generations, I think, our generation, I think, will have it hard because not much attention has been paid to caring for the planet. And we have not developed that side of things. We've taken too long. And now we're finding out, but the harm is really huge already. So our generation will have to work even more to repair that. As Claudia said, past generations had troubles because of other circumstances. For us, it's difficult with the social networks and the pollution that didn't used to be there. Now, people use the car just to go 100 meters or 150 meters. Maybe all you have to do is go and buy some bread or a few basic things. And so this is something we need to improve on. Thank you. Do you think it's easier or harder for you guys? Well, I'm not sure.
Es lo que han dicho, son distintas épocas, distintas
There's
circunstancias.
different moments, there's different circumstances. For example, I believe that when it comes to growing up, we have it easier. We have a lot more things that are easier.
Pero también el tema de las redes sociales,
And
donde, claro,
but on the other
tienen las
hand, there's things
facilidades
like the
para
social
crecer
networks. We have
personalmente, pero no
the
quiere decir que lo
means to
hagamos la
grow,
mayoría. Así que
but
en
it
esta
doesn't mean that
no,
we actually
no
necessarily
estamos
do
tan
it.
jóvenes.
So being so young,
No creo que sea lo correcto porque es lo que han dicho, que
I
pueden
don't
crecer solamente
think
por las redes sociales.
it's
Por
right
eso
that
pienso
people could
que lo
do so
tenemos
much damage on
por
social
la
networks.
parte de que podemos crecer
So I think
personalmente,
that we have it easier in that we can grow
igualmente,
personally
muchos de
more,
nosotros
but also it makes it difficult because we trip ourselves up, we trip each other up. I'm not sure if I've been very clear in explaining that. Yes, very clear. So there's a question there about how far does our freedom go and where does our responsibility begin? What do you think? Are young people nowadays free? Are they responsible? I don't know. Do you think you're somebody who's free? Yes, I feel very free. And what about young people in general nowadays? Every case is different. I really couldn't say, couldn't generalize. I didn't understand the question. Do you feel free? Do you feel that you, as a person, are free and responsible? Do you think that young people nowadays are free and are responsible, or do you need limits? Social networks, control. How do you live that? Well, I feel free, but a lot of people don't feel free because society makes them be someone they are not. So, for example, if you like something and someone else doesn't, then you stop liking it just to be popular, just to be cool. I find that most people are not free because people worry more about what others are thinking about them, for having things. Real friends are the ones who are always with you and will never criticize you. And people are not free because there's many examples. If you buy some trousers and nobody likes them, and they start to insult you, well, those people care more for what other people think than for themselves. I think that freedom involves responsibility, but I think that some people feel less free because society wants them to be someone they are not. And they push them to fulfill stereotypes that can be very tough on those people. I feel, as my colleagues have said, that society sometimes is overwhelming and forces us in a certain way to fit within a character that is perhaps something we like or something we don't like, but we do it just to please others. And we hardly ever stop to think what we would like for ourselves. I think that aside from people and what they think, it's also the parents. For example, my mother, before coming, my mum said, "Oh, wear something cute," my mum said. And I thought, but don't I look cute like this? And the other day I bumped into someone at the supermarket, and she was also like wearing something that looked like pajamas. When we got to school, then I was told that she had said that I looked like I had just got out of bed. And it's like, okay, friends and people criticize you, which takes away your freedom, but parents do too. Before, when you were homosexual or bisexual or whatever, people couldn't say it because they didn't feel free to say what they really are, because otherwise I'm going to be criticized, I'm going to be hurt. They could even kill you for that. I think that young people today, we are more free, but never completely. So perhaps you look freer than you really are? Okay, thank you. As you can see, it's interesting to listen to them because they're not all saying the same things, and often they're saying stuff that we don't really bear in mind normally as adults. What is life? A difficult question. What is life? It's a challenge.
No lo sé. Es que
Explain that? Well, I don't know. You just threw that question at me all of a sudden. Yeah, that's my role a little bit. When you think of life, your parents brought you to the world, you have a certain age, you start to have ideas about what you like, what you don't like. And supposedly life is a gift. That's what Satish is telling us. He's saying life is a miracle. It's a fabulous miracle. You should live it and enjoy it. How do you experience that? Do you see it that way? What do you give importance to in life? What do I give importance to? I see it a bit like a blank page where you can spill over your creativity, because not everything is invented. And I think that the fun thing is that a lot of things can still be invented. And that's difficult too, which is why I was saying earlier it's a challenge, because I want to create something or invent something as a challenge. As I said earlier, I like sports very much. I do athletics, and that has always motivated me hugely. And I see it like if I lose, I'm not doing it well. And if I win, it's because that's what was meant to be. And when I start to be good, that's when I will have fulfilled that challenge. So what do you think is life? I find that life is an opportunity that has to be made the most of. And we need to find what we want to do. And it shouldn't just be a dream, it should be a reality, it should be our life. It's an opportunity. We don't have three lives like in a game. You have one life, you need to make the most out of it and live it 100%. You can't be living with the fear of what others will think or whether you're going to hurt yourself. You have to live your life and you have to learn from your mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes. I think that life is an opportunity to change the world. They're very good at summarizing there. Maria says, I think that life is about contributing in order to move forward. It's like each person will help. Every little helps. everyone will contribute in their own way by being an artist or a scientist. Every person will contribute their own thing so that life can continue and we can build up the hope, not only your own hope, but the hope of future generations too. I've never actually thought of that. When I think about it, I'm very scared about death. I'm very scared when I think about life because it makes me think about death. But I also think it's an opportunity that I need to make the most of. You're saying that you're afraid of death, but you know that in nature, Gustavo, for example, was explaining today that nature is like recycles and regenerates every year. So anything that dies is helping other things be born. Well, I've never thought of it that way. So I think, actually, what I've been thinking is that life is an opportunity and needs to be made the most of to the max. And what is nature? Nature is everything, because everything comes from nature. Nature, the cycle of life, of love. Life or what? Well, birth, death, rebirth, pain, joy. Well, for me, death, for example, is a liberation. Because when somebody dies, it hurts us, but that person actually is becoming free from all their worries and concerns. Everything's done. That's it. There's nothing else to do. I mean, that's the way I see it. I think it's true. This is going to sound very contradictory with what she said, but for me, life is a game that perhaps has a restart button, who knows? Maybe you die and you wake up again. We don't know that. We'll never know until we die. So please don't anybody check that today, but that's what I think it's like a game in which we need to make the most of, and we need to have high expectations, even if we then fall. So we need to go for the top, go for the max, and have high expectations. Because life will end. Even if it frees you, that also means the end. Could you repeat the question for me? It's about the meaning of life. The cycle of life, death, rebirth. What do you think of that? We are who we are, but one day we will no longer be. So what do you think of that? Well, I don't know. I guess. Well, I don't know. I've never actually stopped to think about that. I don't know. It's okay, don't worry. For example, religions have been invented, and there's people who don't know about religions, but they do believe in some kind of spirit or some kind of soul. Do you think that there's some kind of God or transcendence or spirit that is above us? To me, I've always been told that everything happens because it must happen. If something bad happens, it's not because it's bad, but because that's what had to happen. Because sometimes out of the bad comes good. And so, I don't know. Yeah, don't worry, because humanity will continue to ask themselves these questions for the next 30 centuries or so. So don't worry about not solving that question right now. I think that death is something as natural as being born, and so death gives a sense to life, a meaning to life. You know it's going to end sometime, so you set yourself higher challenges and you reach them by knowing that. I find that death is something natural, like Martina has said, that it must happen. Everyone goes through that. And when we are 80 years old, we need to know that we will have lived a fulfilled life because we got up and we kept walking. When we're 80 years old, we will regret what we haven't done. And what we have done, we will see it as a good experience. So whatever we need to do, we must do, and not reach the age of 80 and regret things. But do you think there's anything transcendental that goes beyond us? That when we die, there's something there? I don't think so. I think that when we die, and people remember us, and that we need to die happy, without any worries or concerns, and thinking that in life we have carried out our dream. What do you think of this? He says, of what? Whether there's anything further? I cannot really answer that. My idea is still very green, let's say. It's not quite mature. But I've picked up a lot of information from many places, but I haven't actually processed that and made it my own. So I couldn't say. About death, it's always terrified me. I used to ask my parents all the time, what happens afterwards? What is there? I used to be quite obsessed with that question. Like, what is beyond life? What is in death? Because I actually didn't feel able to embrace any kind of answer. But now I feel a bit more ready to talk about that, to think about that. And before we go on further with a bit of debate, also with the audience, because we'll make the most of the fact that we have them here, all of these things we've talked about here now, do you find that you discuss these things, the spirit of nature, the cycles of life and death? What is life? Is there something further? Do you talk about this at school? Do you work on this at school? No, we don't. No, we don't. You never talk about this? Sometimes I try to debate this with the philosophy teacher, but he won't let us. He won't let you? No, because he says, at the end of the year, you can ask me anything you want. But I missed a class, and so I'm not allowed to ask questions now. But I also like it because he debates for a bit, but if we're talking about Plato's philosophy, he will talk about it regarding what we know about Plato and his philosophy. But we don't talk about it further. We don't develop these ideas in high school. Well, it sounds like you need to spend a good time talking about this. What about your school, which is the Belver International School? Do you talk about these things? Nature, life, the meaning of life? Yes, we do. So, for example, how do you do it? Is it in philosophy class or where? I don't understand very well the question. At the International Belver School, do you talk about these topics? Yes. Yes, because in our school, they're also thinking about the future, not just about studying. They're looking at what's going to happen and how to change that. We don't use very much paper, stuff like that. There's a number of programs in our school that talk about all of this, which is cool. Could you give us an example? There's a group in the school where you can participate and support things to do with climate change and recycling, etc. Thank you. Yes, one example is how a few years ago we had a program in our school where we were talking about our future, how we can help to improve it, and what are our aims. We do talk about these things, but rather than at school, we actually talk with our class tutor. We had a tutor who, if we asked her a question, she would not answer it. And we actually learned a lot. Things like that death is something natural, that we should not be afraid of it. And also, we discuss doing things to help the environment. Could you give us an example of this as well? Every year, for the International Peace Day, we do a charity race for cancer. And every year, we chose a different NGO. We also had 2 students every week who went around the playground for that half an hour and would pick up all the garbage on the floor. We also had like a contest to see who would collect the most batteries. We also have people in class who are cooking, saying, oh, you can't throw things anywhere. So waste needs to be classified properly. We were also collecting bottle tops for somebody to sponsor research into rare illnesses or to support people who don't have that much. And so actually our school is pretty well prepared with that.
Tema medio ambiente.
The issue of environment, people sleeping in the class. You know, we don't talk or explain. No, we watch a video and okay, next off to mathematics. So nothing. You don't like this system? No, not at all, not at all, not at all. And they give us all the colored containers for waste and rubbish, but I see people just throwing papers on the floor, on the ground, and I think that's a terrible irresponsibility on the part of the students. And talking about God and things like that, well, it's a religious school, but I don't think they give us an option of not believing. For example, I personally don't believe, and they force me to go to Mass, even though I say I don't want to, so I think they're really imposing it on us. But I respect that. I respect that because I can't really do much. I can't do anything about it. I have to go, and that's it. Thank you for your contribution. And before asking questions of the audience, I think one last question for you that has a lot to do with the teachers that are here. Do you believe that the current school that you go to, the school of today, is it useful? For example, Greta Thunberg of Fridays for Future, she says, I don't go to school on Fridays because why should I go to school to prepare for a future that might not even exist? What do you think of this idea? Is school today valid? Does it work? Does it prepare you for a good future? Or are there things that have to be changed? And if so, what things would you change about the school? What does the school have to do to be useful for you? Or in other words, what teachers do you like? I think that what they're trying to do is to put lots of students into the same system so that the system can adapt to each student. It's difficult for it to adapt to each individual student, but there are certain things that we have in common. And what they are trying to do is to put us all into the same system, where we can perhaps get good marks, or we have to do sports, we have to be the best at what we do. And so there have been some changes, I must say, even in my school in the last few years, because in the past I've been able to see the difference. Before, they were very much focused on marks, on performance, on being the best. But that changed one day, and now they also focus on our future, how we can feel, our emotions. The teachers, I believe, well, I have one of my teachers here from the school, so I have to be careful. Before we were talking about freedom, and that freedom is a bit observed, isn't it? But anyway, say what you can. Maria, say it and say what you can. In our school, especially the teachers, yes, they do have their different traits and characteristics. I personally believe that some of them teach better than others, but I think that all of them try to make the effort so we can learn. So this is an advanced class of political correction here, correctness, sorry. But you wanted to say something before. We kind of got distracted here. Today's your day. This is your chance. If you don't say it now, I don't know if you're going to have another chance. Well, I don't know. Do you think that the education that you know, is it valuable? Is it worthwhile for your future, or can it improve a great deal? Well, you can always improve. Now we have some things that we can choose optionally. We can do different activities at the school, but there are some things that that are mandatory that we have to do. But perhaps if they hadn't forced us to do them, we would have liked it more, because we would have maybe taken it little by little. But by all of a sudden pushing something on us that we didn't see as positive, well, I think that's something that we haven't been able to like. Katarina, could you repeat the question? Yes, the current education today. Do you think it's adequate for children today, for young people today, or can it be considerably improved? How do you like to learn? Okay, for example, I love hippie teachers that are very hippie, because they talk to you really relaxed and laid back, and they tell you half the class they're telling you about their life, about their lives, and I like that. But for example, at the end of the school year, we do something to improve the facilities of the school. Well, instead of doing that, we could do something to improve the environment, the ecology. But no. Okay. Isabel? Or Maria, if Maria wants to talk. I think what I wanted to say was already said by Maria. So, Alvaro, what do you think? Does the current system, is it adequate, or do we need to improve it? Taking into account all of these issues, nature, freedom, life, or the system just doesn't work. What do you think? I don't think it works as an educational system. Everything's not going to be that easy. You're going to have to make an effort. You're going to have to make an effort if you want to achieve something. For example, the college entrance exam, you have to retain all this information in your head to do an exam, and that's not going to make you a better or worse student. It's what you're doing is very difficult. I mean, they have all these people here watching them in a church, and they're young. I think they're doing a great job. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I mean, I'm awed being up here. Imagine them.
Creo,
I think they've made an effort in talking to us about the climate change. They've given us talks, and we've taken hours from a psychology class to talk about this issue. And I remember, I don't know if it was psychology in another class, and we had to prepare some banners, some posters about climate change with slogans that we came up with so that the teachers could take a picture with them. But they didn't let us go to the climate change demonstrations.
se supone que hay como una norma que una vaga se puede convalidar con 14 días de
But
antelación.
something like that, 14 days before, it could have been requested and we could have done it, but it wasn't even, the march wasn't even called. I mean, we hadn't even started school 14 days before. So there's a theoretical message of protecting the environment, but the young people can't go and demonstrate in order to do so. Okay, let's go. We have 10 minutes in case anyone in the audience has a question. I'm sure they will be happy to answer. Who would like to ask for the floor?
Tendremos 5 minutos para preguntas, así que hasta lo que llegue. ¿Por aquí?
Qualsevol de vosaltres agafa el micro i pot contestar directament. Qui vulgui.
Hola a tots, m'ha encantat.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I've really enjoyed hearing your opinions, but I would like to know when we were talking about climate change and about some of you seeing, well, that there's still hope. What is it that each of you do individually to fight against the climate change? That's one question. The second question is if you could tell me how the message of the teacher should reach you, because sometimes it's difficult. The video's boring. If it's a talk, you get tired of it. So sometimes to reach you is complicated as well. So tell us what we need to do. I think it's difficult to get to an entire class with the talks they give us or the videos. If it reaches 2 or 3 of them, I would see that as success. Is there anyone else that would like to add more questions? We have a question up front as well. Hello, I have 3 questions that have come to mind. Let's see if I remember all 3. First of all, we've talked about the teachers. We've talked about you. What's your attitude when you wake up every day and you go to school? How interested are you? Do you want to be motivated, or do you come motivated yourselves? And I would ask how many adults have asked you. I don't remember the third. Well, can you say the first one? The first one, talking about the system, but everyone's in the system. And a teacher can try to do lots of things, but it would be easier for the teachers if you would wake up in a certain way. When you wake up in the morning to face the day, when you're going towards this future, how do you do it? Are you excited? Are you motivated? Do you want to learn? Do you have curiosity? Do you have a desire to know? Well, I try to go with the right attitude, but it's hard every day to go with hunger, shall we say, with the desire. So I think the teacher has to really push us. Yeah, they have to motivate us. Anyone like to add to that, Katarina? Every day it's hard for all of us to get up and to go to school with a smile on your face is not always easy. But our teachers and the director of the school, the headmaster, our bosses at work, they do the same as we do. They probably get up earlier than we do. So of those 27 kids in a classroom, and the teacher has to say, be quiet, constantly saying, come on, keep quiet, because we always have those two kids that are playing on their computers in class and making noise. And I think Albert has our last question.
Intents, crec, per només una pregunta més. Sí, una. Sí, Albert.
Hola. Hola. Jo us volia preguntar...
This is a question. What do you think would make you happy? At a personal level, not for the world, but if you imagine the future, yes, if this happened to me, if I had this, if I were able to do this, whatever, that would make me really happy. What is it you think that would make you happy? If you could quickly answer. I don't want anything to stand out above other people. I want to have a job. I want to be healthy. And I want to be happy. I don't want to be happy when I'm outside in the street and at work and then cry when I'm at home. Claudia? Well, what would make me happy now is to pass all of my classes and to hang in there. To hang in there, getting up at 6 a.m. I mean, that's quite a task. Yeah, Albert is asking about your life project. What would make you happy in life? Isabel, I would like to do this or that, to be this type of person, to do this type of work or personal project. Well, what I'm doing makes me happy, because if I have a dream and I meet that dream, but what dreams? What's the dream that you have? Well, I have the dream of singing, and now I'm starting to achieve that, and that makes me happy. And that makes me happy because it makes me think that I have possibilities when I get older. And if the people around me are happy, that also makes me happy. Okay, thank you, Alvaro. I don't want to go without saying everything. What would have I don't want to be in a situation where I can say what I should have taken advantage of that situation. I don't have a specific dream, but I don't want to lose the opportunity if it comes to me, and I don't want to lose it because I regretted not doing it. Maria Martina? For me, as Isabel said, I'd like to reach my dreams, my goals, having a job, maybe a family. And I understand that my life, it may not be an easy path. I mean, there's going to be obstacles and twists and turns and detours, but as I said before, everything's going to happen because it has to happen, and I believe that when I finish my day, if I was able to laugh every day of my life, I think that already would make me happy. Thank you. And let's finish with Martina. The question is, what's our dream? Or what do you think would make you happy? What would make me happy would be to find the way of being happy.
Esto es un poco trampa, ¿eh?
This is kind of a trick question here, trick answer. As you can see, it's a lot more interesting often to hear kids talking than to hear us, the adults. So we need to think and listen more and think about what their goals are in the long term so we can help them. They are in a position to go in one way or another, and we have to help them to find out who they are on the inside and what life they want to live. Thank you very much. This is something that's not in what's coming up next is not in our official program. But the other day, talking to Carlos and Isabel, they live in London. And when he talked to me about the book, this book, I knew it, the story behind it, but it's called Dear Son. It's a book about unconditional love to their son that left way too soon. Carlos, I mean, this, I get emotional when I. He's a friend. Carlos Fresnero. And Isabel, his wife. Well, I wanted to thank Guillem because I didn't know we were going to do this. And when one of the first things we did after meeting, after becoming friends, was to go to a David Bowie concert. And as a journalist, I was able to interview him twice during his lifetime. And what I was feeling at this moment is as if I was thinking, wow, Bowie is still alive among us, even though he's deceased. And it's that feeling, and that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about death, but with another approach, from another approach, another point of view, in this context of educating. I think we need to educate not only for life, but also educate for death. We have to begin to understand that death it's a new start. And it's not our final destination. Shatish, how are you? I've learned many lessons from him, and I'm very grateful to him because I've been here on 3 occasions. This is my 4th, and in very special and sad circumstances. As Guillem was saying, our son Albert died in June of last year. It's been a little bit over a year. He was doing graffiti with his friends, Harry and Jack, and he got run over by a train. It was very unexpected death. We knew that he did some graffiti, but we didn't know it was to that extreme, and it was a shock for us. For me, especially, because as a journalist, the death of 3 people, anonymous people in the south of Brixton, until I later discovered one of them was my son. And I need to talk about, sometimes I don't know how to talk about the death of my son, and I thought the best way to do it was to write him a letter that was published a few days later, and it allowed me to reconnect with him. And it was a first step. It was a first step towards what this later became the book. And it hurt a great deal to write it. It was very painful. But I've also learned in this process, it's painful to tell the story, but it's more painful not to tell it. And so you have to make it external. And for me, writing this book was very healing. And the book is full of other stories of parents that have lost their children. Maybe someone else here has lost someone that's very close to you in the last year. And we've discovered how close death is to us in our daily lives. And sometimes it's suddenly. Maybe you lose a mother, different from when you lose a mother or father that's slowly dying, that's slowly phasing out or fading. But each person goes through grief in a different way. Grief is not a straight line, as a young girl said. She said it's a very tortuous path, and it doesn't have an end. So you have to be very patient with it. We often talk about the 5 phases of grieving, from denial, anger, depression, acceptance, and I missed one in the middle. But those phases are there, well defined. I don't remember who said that, but I think those 5 stages are experienced in one day. And then you start over again. So you've accepted it, but there's something that takes you back to the start of the path. And on this path, I've discovered, and thanks to someone that many of you know, Mercedes Castro, who also lost her son Ignacy in a car accident at the age of 18. She has a beautiful book called Living Again. And I understood there's a phase beyond acceptance, and I think that's the reconnection with your loved one, wherever he or she may be, whether you're a believer or not, or if you believe in something that you don't want to even name. So there's a sentence in that book by Mercedes that says, there's good news that I want to give to everybody, and that is your son or daughter never dies completely inside of you. And that's what I want to do with this book. And now Isabel's going to tell us about her experience, how she has maintained my son Alberto alive inside of me. And if there's a lesson that I would like to put into this context as the school of life, is that grief can also be a lesson for life. And I encourage you to learn from it. I'm going to give the floor to Isabel. Isabel wrote the epilogue of the book, and it has helped us to bring our paths together after this crisis. First of all, thank Guillaume for the opportunity of being here today, of inviting us in this very special place. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor. As Carlos has said, I wrote the epilogue of Dear Son, which was an incredible step in this grieving process, because when Carlos told me, listen, what do you want to say for the press release when it happened, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say anything. I thought, well, this is a private story. I don't want anyone to know about it. And as you move forward, well, he was able to write the book, and now I have no problem. And just having to convey this message, tell our family and friends, was very painful to me. I was very happy to see these young people. It's kind of fun listening to their problems and their situations with studies and education. I feel a great deal of affection for this period of life that they're in. And in the epilogue, I include some sentences that I wrote at Alberto's funeral that have to do with that, about communication between parents and their children. And when something like that happens, like in my case, I realized that it was absurd, because Alberto was in a moment when friends are more important than the family, or it's difficult to communicate with your parents. And we were in the midst of that give and take, and unfortunately we didn't have the opportunity to have him when to see him mature and to step into his parents' shoes and understand our side. But we haven't had that opportunity with Alberto, unfortunately. And so at the funeral, when I spoke, I asked kids to trust their parents more and to open up more to them because parents are always there and we always want the very best for our children. And also, I spoke to the parents and say we need to be more generous, more graceful with our children and not as rigid. Sometimes we're set in our views and we really don't give them any leeway to do things their own way. And sometimes we have to let them, make mistakes along the way because that's how you learn as well. Now, what Carlos said before about how death is a lesson in a certain way, truth be told, I agree. And when you lose someone very close to you, all of a sudden, the map of who you think you are and your relationships, your work, your family, when a piece of that is suddenly lost until everything falls back into place, it's a very, very difficult time. For us, losing Alberto was like suddenly joining a club where you pay in tears the right to be a member. Your membership is paid in tears. And as Carlos said, all of a sudden you begin to pay attention to death. You begin to realize it's there, that it happens to everyone. And I was watching, with my younger son, I was watching South Park, and the chef, I don't know if you are familiar with South Park, but the chef the cook was saying, well, that's life. It makes you laugh, it makes you suffer. But what God wants, God is nourished by your sweet tears. It's a very punk series, television series, it's a cartoon. But yes, you do learn. You do learn. And all of a sudden, we began to run into people, wonderful people, because they have entered something like a different dimension. When you have a loss so close to you, it makes you grow. And the first day when we went to an altar that was put up by his friends at the station near where he was killed, one of the mothers of one of his friends called me and she said, yes, I lost my boyfriend. He was 23 years old. He was going to fly to New York. I took him to the airport. It was a TWA plane many years ago, and there was a terrorist attack, and he was one of the ones that died. And things are normal. You take your lover, your boyfriend, your fiance, whatever, to the airport, and then a little while later you find out he no longer exists. And it just happens with him. We go every summer. Carlos has been going all his life to the same place for vacation in summer. All his friends are there and they have parents. And there's a woman in particular who has 9 children. She had 9 children, but now she has 8 actually. And all of her children have children. So this women's grandchildren were our kids' friends. And they're just a wonderful family, one of these extended families where they're all just the greatest. And I have always felt attracted to this woman, to Ana, who Carlos talks about in his book. She's a woman now and 80-some years old, but I always saw something very special in her. And last year, when we lost Alberto, we went to Cunil, and one of her children came to me and said, I understand our sister Anna died when she was 23 years old. She went on a honeymoon. On her honeymoon, she'd just been married. They went on their honeymoon to the Canary Islands. She had a car accident and she died. So what I want to say by telling you this is that this woman, well, I said to this woman, I never realized this. I never knew this. And your mother seems like a very special person. And she says, oh, yes, my mother, after that situation, she used to be just a normal person, you know, that's more interested in fashion than anything else. And now, after this has happened, you can't come to her with any complaints because she says, oh, all of that can be resolved. Those aren't real problems. So death is very painful, but the good part is that it teaches you how to live. You start to value things more, the opportunities, you take them more into account. Yes, there's something that Anna said. She says, the school of pain widens your heart. And pain, at first you kind of shrink, but then it allows you to straighten up and open up to other people. And that's one of the statements that most caught my attention. And also, silence can be healing up to a certain point, but what is not good is the imposed silence. That silence about death that we find in our society. We have gone from formal grieving to almost forgetting of the person that's died. So I think we have to find that balance. We have to recover beautiful tradition. The grieving in her town was very special. I mean, at first we were overtaken by it, but grieving is necessary. You shouldn't avoid it. You have to go through it. You have to trudge through it and continue on that path, sharing it along the way with other people. I'd like to finish with a statement of a woman from my town. As Carlos said, it was quite overwhelming for us because we had no idea. And when we got there, the entire town came to my mother's house. My mother's house is always full of people, but usually her friends and her cousins. But all of a sudden, the husbands show up, the men of the town, everyone well dressed, everyone to give their condolences, and we were overwhelmed by it. And we realized that the good thing about that is that people recognize, they acknowledge your loss. Carlos and I have lived in, the Anglo-Saxon world, and they're big cities, and sometimes people don't really acknowledge your loss. There are people that just don't acknowledge it, and that's tremendous. I mean, they don't have to tell you much. All they have to say is, we know what happened and we're so sorry for you. Just to recognize, to acknowledge that a person has suffered a great loss, and that helps you to accept it. And the quote that I want to finish with is from a woman that my mother has repeated to me over the years when she saw me at my worst. Her name was Carmen Chacon. She has passed away. But during the Civil War, her father and her brother and her husband were executed, and she was pregnant with her second child, and I can imagine what she went through. Later, she got remarried. She lived a long and a happy life. But what she told my mom, and what my mother has reminded me of, is that you have to carry your cross with the right attitude. So when you have a bad moment, remember that it could be worse.
Gracias, Carlos. Bé, el pròxim convidat
So our next guest is not a psychologist. He's a philosopher, a clandestine philosopher. Rafael Santandreu, please join us. Thank you, Guillem.
Bueno, pues sí, porque la psicología que yo practico, que se llama psicología
Yes,
cognitiva,
the
filosofía del
philosophy
pensamiento,
that I practice is
tiene unas
cognitive
raíces profundamente
psychology,
filosóficas.
or
De
the
hecho,
psychology of
ahora que me
thought that
comentas
has
esto,
some
hace
deep
unos meses
roots.
me pasó
A few
algo
months ago,
particular,
something
que fue
quite
que me
particular
llamaron
happened to me,
para dar una charla
which was that I was
en
called to
Córdoba.
give a talk in Cordoba.
Y era en un congreso
And it was at
de
a congress
no, no de
of
filósofos, de
philosophers, well,
latinistas.
not quite philosophers, but
Es una cosa
Latin, experts
espectacular, ¿no?
in Latin,
Y
which
se
is quite
reunían,
spectacular.
pero era un congreso para
And they were
profesionales, ¿no?
gathering at
Eran
this congress
expertos
for
en latín, griego
professionals,
antiguo,
experts in Latin,
filosofía e
ancient
historia
Greek, philosophy, history of
me
those
invitaron a
times.
mí.
And I was
Era algo
invited,
curioso, ¿no? Porque yo no,
which is
a mí
quite
me gusta la historia, he leído alguna revista de
remarkable
historia,
because
pero no
I
tengo
don't
ni
really
idea
know about history.
de
I
dónde
like
me llamaron,
reading
¿no?
the
Y
old
me encantó,
magazine, but
me
why did
encantó.
they call me?
Fue porque
Well,
iban
I
a
went,
hablar, era un congreso
and
sobre
they'd
el
called me
emperador
because
Marco
they were going to
Aurelio,
talk
que por cierto
about
tenía
Marco
raíces
Aurelio, the
griego
emperor,
cordobesas.
who actually had
Y resulta que
roots in
iba a hablar de Marco
Cordoba.
Aurelio, ¿no? Se
So
reunían como
they were
100 y muchos
gathering
expertos,
there, all these experts from
latinistas,
around the world,
gente, me encantó, gente que
to
dedicaba
talk
toda la
about
vida a
this,
estudio
people who
de
spend
la
and
Roma
dedicate their
antigua.
lives
Entonces había una
to the
ponente
study
que
of
era
the ancient
fascinante,
Rome. There was
que
one
su ponencia
speaker
iba sobre
whose
la moda de la
speaker
barba en la
whose
época
talk
antes de
was
los siglos.
the fashions
O sea, y
in
la tía llevaba toda una
beards
serie de diapositivas ahí
back in those days. So she had all
y
these
aquello se iba avanzando,
photos
tal,
of
increíble.
statues with the
La tía lo
beards
llevaba
and,
mucho
pointing
tiempo
out,
estudiando
oh,
ese
they
tipo de
did
cosas.
this and then they evolved
Pero
into
entonces me
that. So
llaman,
that was
porque
her
Marco
area of study,
Aurelio,
of her whole
el
life.
emperador, resulta que
So
es
Marco
conocido como
Aurelio,
el
this
emperador
emperor, was known as the
era un
philosopher
gran
emperor.
conocedor y sobre todo
He was a
practicante
great
del estoicismo, ¿no? Lo aplicaba para la
practitioner of
vida. Él mismo lo
Stoicism.
vivió.
And he
Dice,
even
yo soy una
said,
cosa así que
of
poseo
all the things I
los triunfos, ¿no?
possess,
Las
or that I
pirámides,
have
las
ever
conquistas, las
possessed,
espadas,
all of these
los
large
reinos,
military
lo más
victories, my
importante
palaces,
para
my
mí
kingdoms,
es
the
mi
most
filosofía,
important thing for me
porque
in my
es lo
life is
único
my
capaz
philosophy,
de darme la
because it's
felicidad
the only
y
thing that is
darme mi
capable of
manera de ser.
giving or taking away my
Entonces ellos
happiness.
dijeron, no, pues vamos a traer
And
a
so they said, oh,
Rafael,
let's bring Rafael
que es
Santandreu,
un estoico
who is a
moderno. Y es
modern
cierto que yo intento
Stoic.
aplicarme a mi vida
Because it's
esa
true that I
filosofía
tried
y
to
era
apply
aplicable
this
para mi vida.
philosophy to my own life, which is the
Entonces,
precursor
además fue
of
muy interesante porque yo
cognitive
fui a todos,
psychology.
una charla
So it's
como
very interesting because
la
I gave
tuya,
a
larga,
talk
como
like
dos
the one I will give
mañanas,
today and also tomorrow
y
for
muy
you.
bueno, ¿no? Porque
And
iba
it was really
diciendo
good
cosas
because I was just saying stuff
y iban levantando la
and
mano
they
y
would
iban
lift their
diciendo, pero
hands, these
Rafael,
wise
decía una
people,
palabra en latín,
and they would raise their
aleo,
hand
acta, no sé qué, tal.
and they would say
Esto,
some words in
esto
Latin.
lo dijo no sé quién, Séneca, tal.
And they would say, oh, what you just said,
Pero yo
Seneca
lo
said
veo
this, or
como una manera de
it's
pensar
interesting how
articulada,
one way of
de
thinking
años
will
antes de diferencia. Vale.
bring together
Dicho esto,
people
bueno,
2,000
yo
years
soy
later.
psicólogo, llevo mucho tiempo
Having said this,
trabajando
I'm a
en ubicar a la
psychologist. I've
gente,
been
cambien
working in this for a long
profundamente y
time,
por rápido.
trying to get people to
Se puede
change
hacer,
deeply
me
and
parecerá
quickly,
increíble que pueda
which is
hacerlo.
possible to do. It may seem
Entonces,
incredible,
la
but you
psicología
can do it
cognitiva
if you know how.
pues
So
trabaja en
cognitive
realidad
psychology is actually
trabajando
working,
tu filosofía,
or it
tu manera de
works
pensar para
on your
transformar tu
way
manera
of
de sentir.
thinking in order to
Porque
transform the way
ese
you
es el
think.
principio de la psicología cognitiva,
This is
que
the
nuestras
great principle
emociones
of
son
cognitive
producto
psychology, is
de
that our
nuestro diálogo
emotions
interno, de lo que nos
are the
decimos,
product of
de
our inner
nuestra manera de
dialogue,
ver.
of what we say
Y
to
nosotros
ourselves, of our
creemos de una
way of
manera un
seeing
poco
the world. And we
precipitada
believe, perhaps a bit
que existe
pretentiously,
una manera
that there is a way
funcional
that is
de ver el mundo y
functional
existe una
in
manera
how
que
we see the
funciona
world,
o otras maneras
and
que
there's
no
other
funcionan.
ways that are very dysfunctional of seeing the world.
Investigamos cuáles
So
son
we research
las
which
que
are the ones
producen felicidad
that
y bienestar
produce or
interior
generate
y las que
happiness
producen
and
todo lo
inner
contrario.
well-being, and
Intentamos
which are those
aprender
that
ese lenguaje
cause the
interno.
opposite. And we try to learn that inner
Entonces,
language.
claro, esto
And
tiene
so that is
repercusiones en
our
realidad en
work.
todos los
And this
ámbitos de
has
la vida.
repercussions in
También
every
en el
aspect of life,
de la
including
relación, la
education,
familiar, parental, social,
family,
¿no? Es una manera
friendships,
de entender el
etc.
mundo.
It's a
Que
way
por
of
cierto,
understanding the
es
world,
una manera de entender el
which, by the
mundo
way, is a way
también natural,
of
radicalmente
understanding the world that
natural.
is also radically
Pensamos
natural.
que si quieres
We
una
believe
pista de
that
cómo
if you
funcionan las
want a
mentes,
clue as to how
fíjate en lo
things
que es
work,
natural. Y por allí
look at what is
irías por buen
natural,
camino, ¿de acuerdo?
and that will take you
Entonces hoy, si queréis,
along the right
yo
path.
como voy a dar una charla ahora que
If
dura
you
media
like,
hora
I will give a talk today that lasts half an hour and another one tomorrow. So I thought I could explain to you in a summarized way what cognitive psychology is about. And tomorrow we can go in detail into how or what repercussion that has on education or the influence that we have on others, okay? And also, I think tomorrow, at the end of the day, we'll have an open debate that will be done by Albert and I. And so there you can make a note of the questions that come up for you, and we'll have some time to respond to those. And tomorrow, Albert, by doing that, we'll be able to also see what differences there are in our thinking, which I'm sure there are. Okay, so there are two concepts that in the psychology that I practice are very important, which I'm going to explain in a very succinct way right now. We believe that emotional unease, neurotic unease, has a mother and a father. The father is what I call terribilitis, and the mother is needilitis, neediness, basically. And those two coming together create this bomb, ticking bomb, that is neurosis. The terribilitis is telling ourselves in our head that anything that's terrible is absolutely awful. It's like the end of the world. It's like a nuclear war. And if it did happen, it would be awful. And we sometimes get this virus, this illness of terribilitis, and we walk around thinking that way. Earlier, you were saying how that elderly lady used to say, that death of my daughter made me stop terribiliting so much. When somebody now says, oh, look, I've been Movistar phone company has charged me double what they should. A terrible, end of the world. Somebody like that lady would say, look, I mean, just don't even go there, this is ridiculous. So that's the point. It's not making a big deal out of things, basically. If you notice that when we're in a certain emotional state, we start to make everything be terrible. Any adversity becomes awful. And we even argue about it, and we actually fight over being right about it. However, the strongest and happiest people who exist don't do that. They don't make a mountain out of a molehill. I've described this character very much in my books, so someone quite admirable in that sense is scientist Stephen Hawking. Remember him? He died a couple of years ago. So Stephen Hawking, for almost 50 years of his life, had the adversity of not being able to move at all. He couldn't even speak. However, he told himself that that is a minimal problem. And he was honest about that, and he would argument that with himself. And he would say to himself, as long as I continue to do things that are valuable for myself and for others, I'm going to have a great time. Because if I focus on that and I just forget about the things I cannot do, and I just focus on the things I can do, then I'm going to have a great time doing it. And if you stop and think about it, it's really true. We actually complain about things by comparison. So, for example, most of us walk. Albert does it, for example. Most of us do walk. But if we had been born in a world where nobody walks, we wouldn't complain. And it's the same situation. So actually, we complain by comparison. We are happy or unhappy by comparison. Now, isn't that stupid? Why don't you think, hey, so why don't I make comparisons where I always come out winning, the winner? Well, it may seem stupid, but it's not. We are thinking animals who evaluate, and that's where the game is. This game of happiness, the meaning of happiness. And ancient philosophers knew this and they realized this, but it seems too simple to be true. That it's all in what I say to myself in my head. My own story with cognitive psychology is quite special. As I was a young man studying that, like these young people who were here earlier, I remember reading a book by Albert Ellis, who is one of the fathers of psychology. And I read it and thought, but this is really stupid. What's he saying? That all the problems for human beings come from what they're thinking? So I just ignored it. And so I decided to research psychoanalysis, which seemed more serious and stuff. But when I was about 25, 26, I had like a little personal crisis, and by chance I had to write an article for a magazine about cognitive psychology. I took again a book by Albert Ellis, and in order to write this article, I thought, okay, I'm going to reread this. And when I read it, I was like, oh, wow. It had effect on me. I realized this is what I've been doing myself for a while now, and that's why I'm having a hard time. I'm activating a negative internal dialogue. That is what is leading me down the wrong way, down the painful way. So our inner dialogue, if we make everything terrible, then our emotional world will be terrible. And if we don't do that, we won't. So we've seen now the father of neurosis, which is terribilitis. Okay, so terribilitis is married to another phenomenon who's called needinessitis. It's being needy, which is also a virus. The tendency of thinking that we need lots of things in order to be okay. We need to be thin. We need to have a good job. We need to have a partner. We need to have a nice apartment. We need to have good holidays, know languages, travel, be an extrovert, and 15 million more things. Because and careful, because if you fail in one single thing, you are a failure, you're an absolute worm, you're worth nothing. Notice how every need that we make up for ourselves, and most of them are, is actually a huge weight to bear. Because if you don't achieve that thing that you told yourself in your head is absolutely essential for your happiness, you're going to be really sad and upset. Why? Because you actually hopefully you will realize that actually that wasn't that important, and then you may feel even lost and go, oh, so which way do I go now? So notice terribilitis and necessititis. So people who are happy never turn things into terrible things, and they also have very few needs. So I like to quote St. Francis of Assisi for this, who at the end of his life said this: I need less and less things, and the few things I need them very little. So it's like a play on words there. I'm sure that this guy was very strong and very happy. Because if you have very few needs, that is a key element in being happy. But whenever we talk about necessititis or terribilitis, when we're talking about necessititis, it generally has to do with material things, or we relate it to that. But actually, immaterial needs can be much worse. How many times I've had people coming to me, a woman at 30, 35, 40, 45, who can't have kids, or who's having huge problems having kids. And there's a moment when she comes really nervous and she gets depressed. And it may sound strange, but that actually is an invented need. It's very absurd to say, I need to have children in order to be happy. But because it's not a need that is material, it seems like it's more credible. But actually, this is a weight that you are laying upon yourself unnecessarily. Another of those invented needs that's quite a classic and that drive us crazy often is the need for respect. Because every time that somebody is disrespectful to us at work or driving or whatever, we go crazy. We have the need for somebody else or other people to respect us all the time. That's like really crazy. Firstly, that's not going to happen. It's not possible. Secondly, why do you want that? Is it that important? Total respect, does that bring total happiness? No. But we create this need in our head. Notice how, having said this, many of you will be thinking that, Rafael, respect is important, right? Well, is it? Maybe it's not. Somebody who has very few needs won't see it that way. When I started writing books on psychology, when I wrote the first one, 10 years ago now, I remember that I said many things, and I often said something that seemed very evident to me. And I used to say, talking about needs, that the only needs human beings really have are water and food for the day. If you can get that, then you can be like super happy, like you've sorted. And I was really surprised that there was a big, like, big fracas was raised when I said this. Lots of people were like arguing about it, but it seemed so evident to me. Because people keep adding more and more needs, material and immaterial, such as respect. Well, I don't think respect is that important. It's great, it's cool, but it's not something that you need. In psychology, we also say, in cognitive psychology, that there is a line that defines and separates desire from need, and that human beings have a huge need or huge tendency to walk over that line. For example, I may decide that I no longer want to be a psychologist. Maybe I want to be an actor. So I start doing a course. I go to Hollywood and do another training. And I come to a point after a couple of years when I go, if I don't manage to become an actor, this is going to be a failure. I have to do it, otherwise I cannot be happy. So see the difference? There's one thing that is a desire, which is legitimate, and it's like a game, and it's very normal. But the another thing, different thing, is to turn that into an absolute need. And that's something we do very often indeed. I desire something so much that in my imagination, I make it an absolutely essential condition for my happiness. So yes, there are good things in life, but let's not turn them into things that are absolutely essential. It's difficult for us not to do it, but let's really try. So you're seeing some principles of cognitive psychology? Many people think when we explain this, they think, but Rafael, this cognitive psychology, which on the other hand, on one hand says there's nothing that terrible, relax, and on the other hand says, oh, there's very few real needs, so relax. We often think, yeah, but wouldn't this turn us into someone who doesn't really care about anything? People say, Rafael, aren't you just someone who doesn't give a toss? And he says, no. Actually, somebody who doesn't give a toss is actually somebody who's fearful, so fearful of facing things, or has so many invented needs that they don't dare to do stuff, but they pretend and go, oh, I don't care. But actually, happy, relaxed people are very keen to explore the world. So if you suggest to a child, hey, let's go up that mountain, let's explore that, immediately they'll want to go. But there's no needs, there's no obligation, there's no pressure, without any crazy needs. When we start to be neurotic, and often society makes us a bit neurotic, we're fearful that if we don't force ourselves to do things, if we don't use the force of fear, because we're bad kids, we won't do anything. Another of the principles, which we will see a bit more tomorrow, is that we all think that everybody is good by nature. I think that's something that when you're an educator, that's kind of at the base of how you exercise your profession and everything in general. And that's why we develop the concept of unconditional acceptance of oneself and of the others, which is really important. Which means that we think that everybody wants to do things as best as possible, be happy, and make others happy. Everybody wants to do that. However, it's true that as we grow up, we start to make mistakes and reach the conclusion that that's not possible. And what we should do is behave badly before others do it to us. Or we directly just go a bit crazy in the head. But actually, the seed in the people is to be happy and make others happy. And proof of that is the fact that if we were to visit any school right now, any infant school, and we visit 4-year-old kids, you will see what we are within. People just want to play and be happy and have a nice time and connect with others and love. Because actually, we do know that plenitude and happiness is in loving others and enjoying company with others. This is really important because if you think this and you're very much convinced about this, when you see that somebody's doing something wrong or something bad, you very quickly think, well, it's because they don't know, they're confused, or they're actually sick. That has consequences on your reasonings in your head. One is that you no longer fear somebody else who's doing something bad. You see it as an illness, and you don't take it personally. Secondly, you think that person can heal, and so your attitude towards them will be very different. You'll try to help, or you will just step away. If you don't have time to help, you'll just step away, but you won't actually wish them any ill, and that changes everything. And there's some really big consequences on your own acceptance of yourself. If you don't accept others unconditionally when they fail, you're not going to accept yourself either when you fail. You're going to use the same mode of punishment to yourself, thinking, oh, I'm a bad person and all that. So these are some principles, there's many more, of cognitive psychology. So what consequences does this have in classroom, in education? Well, tomorrow we're going to go into that in further detail, but I could cite some of those points. I'm just going to cite them. I'm just going to mention them because I know that this can be a bit more controversial, and that way you can think about it this afternoon, evening, and discuss. How much time do I have? So what I've said very quickly about mental health for people in general, in education, has to do with the fact that the right education is an education that is entirely free. Because if human beings only have the need of water and food for the day, and we're really convinced of that, then we don't have a need for education either. We don't have a need for culture. With that, I don't mean to say that it's bad, but I'm saying it's just not as important. If we believe that in a radical way, then education should be free. It should not be imposed, because we only impose the things that we feel are necessary, because if you don't do that, it's the end of the world, a nuclear war. So how should the perfect school be? We can develop this a bit further tomorrow. A school, as we were saying earlier, at the press conference yesterday, it should be a school where kids are free to be outside playing football or in the mathematics class. And the students should decide. And I think you know there are some schools in the world that are like that. Truth is that if the teacher does that, so the job of the teacher is to make it so interesting in the mathematics class is that the kids prefer to be in their class than outside playing. Kids, people, it really should be that way, in theory. It should be an education based on showing or teaching that the most important thing in life is love. Teaching them to love. Because the only needs we've seen that human beings have are food and drink for the day. Therefore, education is not as important, and thus we quickly see that in a scale of values, loving as the basis of happiness should be #1 subject at school. Really way ahead of any other content that is given.
Now, having said this, I must add that human beings, and I was interviewed before and they asked this, they asked me to define, in my opinion, the definition of the word love. And I mentioned that love, at least I understand it this way, it's something that's very broad. It can be sentimental love, it can be love between friends, but very important, it is also love of things or love of activities. A person can be full of love because that person loves music or loves his work or loves nature. It's as powerful a love as any other. And another important thing, and all of us have had this experience when we were students, and that is that the teacher that teaches us to love a subject, whether it be music or mathematics or English, just that was the best treasure that a teacher could give you, right? Because deep down, love continues to be the most important thing once we've covered our basic needs. So the teacher has to base his teaching on love, in my opinion, and teaching people to love more and to love better. And finally, these are the 3 points that are most important. And I was talking about this to Albert during lunch. The most important thing is to teach people to relate to other people, how to get along with other people. This is basic, especially in our day when our society has made us very individualistic and many of us don't know how to relate to other people. Now, Albert has the good fortune of living in community for quite some years now, so he has had the opportunity of learning all of the techniques, all of the ways of cohabiting with 5 or 10 people at the same time together that aren't his family members. Now, this in nature, it was the normalist of things. Tribes live in communities of 70, 100 people. I mean, they had some tremendous ways of relating and getting along with each other. Now, I remember I've often had young patients, let's say of 30 years of age, that will flagellate themselves with those needs. They'd say, "Well, Rafael, I'm 30 years old and I'm still living with my parents. It's horrible." And not only that, I can't bear them. I just can't stand them. And many people around them would be saying, "Well, yes, it's time that you become independent." But I see that phenomenon in a very different way. I would tell them, well, what's the problem of you living with your parents? It's wonderful to live with your parents. If we take some Indians from the Amazon and we say, okay, we live in this world that we have constructed where people are incapable of living together with the people that they most love. And they would say, well, what's wrong with these people? You're not able, if you're not able to enjoy living with the people that you love and that love you, then something's wrong. And they'd say, that's madness. That can't be. Well, our inability to relate to others is at such a level that we can't even enjoy living with the people that love us the most, and that's bad news. I believe that in schools it would be ideal, it would be excellent if we taught children to relate lovingly and to understand each other well, to resolve the problems that arise, and that would need to be one of the main subjects in a school's curriculum. And as we'll see tomorrow, in my opinion, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th would be what they know about math, what they know about physics. All of that is not as important. And often at my office, I've had teachers that come to see me because they're very stressed or for whatever the reason, and I give them some advice. And you might think that I'm crazy to say this, but they tell me, Rafael, look, parents come to see me and they complain because their son or their daughter didn't get a good enough mark. And I always tell them, well, give them the good mark then. Maybe I'm irresponsible. I say, just give them the mark. But they say, Rafael, that's not fair. I said, yes, but the world will never be fair, so cool down. If parents are that crazy, if they have such a need to get good notes, good marks, then give them to them. If they're that crazy, well, that's their problem. But what I want to say with this is that it's not that important for kids to pass or fail subjects, but rather the points we've talked about, that they love each other, that they should put love above any other thing, that they should adjust their value scale because they don't need other things to be happy. That's all they need. But on the other hand, I also tell them to pass everyone. I say, just pass them all. Why are you failing them? Pass them. Why give them those bad moments? Just, it's not necessary. So these are things that we'll be able to develop tomorrow, and during the question and answers, we can go into greater depth. But let me tell you that cognitive psychology, which is what I've been talking about, can be very striking the first time you hear what it's about, because you need a line of logic to understand it. But if you find it interesting, and I think this is the best thing, if you find some of the things I've said, you find them interesting, turn to some cognitive psychology books. There are lots of books out there. Some of them are mine, and I'm Catalan, and so I encourage you to buy some. And Stoic philosophy, you can learn from that as well. It's normal that for some of you there will be an initial clash, because we think that our way of thinking, our thoughts are what produce our emotional results. But if we want to change that, we have to change the way we think. Therefore, we have to be open to seeing things in a radically different way. I often say, imagine if I had someone depressed come to my office, maybe depressed for many years, and if we agreed on everything. If the patient said, well, look, what's happened to me, isn't this terrible? I said, yeah, that sucks. And if it was like that the whole time, I think the person wouldn't change. I tell all of my patients that they have to be prepared to listen to things that are going to seem totally irrational to them. Because if we're going to change their view, we have to give them something totally different than what they currently have. So for that reason, they have to be more or less open to analyzing something that's really going to clash with them. So tomorrow, I invite you all to come back so that we can continue with this topic, and thank you very much for your attention.
Bé, per acabar el dia d'avui, aquest dia...
So to close this very intense day, Satish and his son Muki are going to have a dialogue between them of about 30 minutes. So Satish, Muki, please.
Perhaps we would start talking to each other a little, and then we would like audience to ask questions. If I can ask Mukti, that when you are working for environment and low carbon lifestyle, and that seems to make you also very happy. And lots of people have been asking, what makes you happy? In addition to working for the environment, what else makes you happy?
Thank you. Tears make me happy. Today I've cried a lot of tears. I've been very touched. I think that what they were saying earlier, that tears make your heart bigger and there's more space for happiness. So we need some tears to grow the heart to make a bigger space for happiness. I consider myself one of the most selfish people in the world. And I pursue my own selfish interests so intensely that I've made a science out of my own happiness. And I found I can buy things, I can earn money, and I lived like a king in India for 5 months because 1,000 euros in England is worth 10,000 euros in India, so I traveled like a king. It didn't make me that happy. I've also drunk a lot of alcohol, dabbled with a few drugs, had quite a lot of sex, some of which made me happy. But I noticed that there's one thing which made me a lot more happy. I can buy something and I get happiness times 1x. But when somebody gave me a gift, my lodger in my house made me a birthday cake.
Yeah.
And she's not my family, she's not even a very good friend. She had no reason to make me a birthday cake. She made me a birthday cake. And when I got that birthday cake, my happiness was 10x.
Really, yeah.
So I realized that gifts make me so much more happy than buying something for myself. So how do I get more gifts? And they have to be not earned. If they're earned gifts, they only give me 2x. It has to be completely spontaneous gift for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I get that, then I get 10x happiness. So how can I help with that? I have to do more.
Yeah.
Spontaneous gifts.
What is the best way to get a gift?
To give.
To give.
To give spontaneously, just for no reason. That's the thing that makes me happiest.
That's wonderful. Now, these are, majority of them are teachers here. And we had young people here sitting in a panel, young students, talking about their school. Can you tell us a little bit about your schooling?
Yeah. I'm very, very lucky, my father, and we're very good friends these days. Almost best friends. We weren't always best friends. Maybe we'll tell you a little bit that we had maybe 10 years of quite a lot of fighting. But one of the wonderful gifts that my father gave me is that he, with 9 other families, started a school. And I had 6 of the richest years of my life at that school. And at that school, we spent half the time doing academic subjects and half the time doing practical subjects. And so in some of the classes, I would help the local farmer's son with the maths. And then after school, he would break down my motorbike into all the smallest parts and show me how to clean out the carburetor. And so there was respect for everybody, because there was some subject that everybody could excel at. So there was a lot of respect. There wasn't people who were considered stupid in that school, or people who were considered more intelligent. Everyone was respected for something. And they had one of Satish's friends, a very clever headmaster. And at the beginning of term, we would have one whole week just to discuss the curriculum. And he would sit us down, say, "What do you want to learn?" We'd say, And someone said, "I want to learn mechanics." It's a farmer's son who has to fix tractors. Someone else, "I want to learn building." Someone else says, "I want to learn technical drawing." So they cleverly, this teacher, Colin Hodges, cleverly got the children to start saying what they wanted to learn. And then he said, for mechanics, maybe, do you think it's useful to use mathematics for mechanics? Okay, yeah, mathematics. And is it useful to have good communication skills to talk to people on the farm or write letters? Yes, okay, English is useful. So they very cleverly got the children to decide. And I always had a real struggle, because in my timetable, I couldn't fit in all the subjects that I wanted to study into my 1 week, because there was 36 subjects on offer, and I learned Sanskrit and building and mechanics and farming and gardening, and there was cheese making, basket making, shoe making. and also academic subjects.
And cow milking.
And I got my A-levels in maths and physics, communications, no problem. I got a degree in communications, so you don't need to just learn academic subjects at school to get a good degree. In fact, I went to visit Eton, one of the most famous schools in England, and one of the most expensive private schools. And at Eton, every day from lunchtime onwards, the whole afternoon is pure sport. And they know that that makes the children perform best. So, so thank you for this great gift of the school.
Okay, the small school, yeah.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah, okay.
I'm still young enough to be facing the challenges of life, and sometimes it's very difficult. And so you are one of those great kind of experts who make things look easy, and you make life look easy, and you've done many things in your life. But can you tell me, were there one or two particular times in your life that were the most challenging times that you can remember that you'd be willing to share?
Yes. One of the most challenging time for me was when I was a monk and I read a book, autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. And it was such engaging book. It was telling something which was not quite part of my life. And Gandhi was saying that how many people can become a monk? Spirituality should be for everybody. And so that challenged me. And then that night, after reading the book, I had a dream. And Mahatma Gandhi came in my dream. And he was standing on the top of a sand dune. And I was standing below the sand dune. And he was saying in my dream that you don't have to give up the world to practice spirituality. Spirituality should be for everybody. Therefore, make the world a beautiful place. Help to make the world a beautiful place. The world is not sinful. The world is not bad. It's beautiful. And make it even more beautiful. And that dream was so powerful. I even now remember the dream. And so next day, I thought that I can, perhaps Gandhi is still there. I was 18 years old. The dream was so strong, so clear, so vivid. I didn't feel it was a dream. I felt as if it was real. And so I went looking for that sand dune. And I went out of this town, Ratangarh in Rajasthan, lots of sand dunes there. And here and there looking, I didn't find Gandhi, I got lost. And anyway, in the end, I found my way back. And I've written about this in my book, Elegant Simplicity. But that day was such a challenging day that I cannot forget in my life, because I had become a monk for life. Once you are a monk in Jain, you are a monk for life. And I wanted to give up the monkhood. And then one night, after midnight, after a few days, I did run away and escape the monastery. But that was the most challenging decision that I have made in my life, to give up the monastic order and run away. And my mother, when I went to my mother, she was totally against my giving up the monastic order. And she said, go back to the monastery. You cannot come. She don't even give me a glass of water. And so then I went to a Gandhi ashram. And then I started my life as an activist. So sometimes in your life, you have to take such a big decision. And you said about you and my relationship of hardship and difficulty. For 10 years, again, like you and I, at least we were speaking to each other. For 10 years, My mother did not speak to me because I had given up my monastic order for 10 years. Then after 10 years, she came to me where I was staying and knocked at my door, unannounced, without a letter, without a telephone call, knocked at my door and said, I've come to give you forgiveness. That was the most difficult thing in my life. I don't know if I told you this story.
No,
Yeah.
no, you haven't told
But
me
in
about
my
the
book.
dream.
It's in my
The
book,
dream.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And you asked me 2 questions, so I've got one more question.
Okay.
This is a difficult question, but is there a particular 1 or 2 of your happiest moments in your life?
Any?
1 or 2 of your most happy moments
Most
of your
happy
life?
moment, yeah. One of the most happy moments of my life is meeting your mother. It was, how many, 48, 49 years ago?
I'm 46, so yeah.
Yeah, 40, so he's 46, so 47, 48 years ago. I was in London in a conference like this church, but more in the crypt of the church called St. Martin in the Fields. And I was standing again like Gandhi at the top, and I standing there. This time, Mukti's mother, my wife, June, she was at the top of the stairs, and I was at the bottom of the stairs, in the crypt of St. Martin in the Fields. And when she was coming, I saw her, and I said, this is the person of my life. The very first day, without speaking to her, without talking to her, I felt that this was the person of my life. And on that first day, because I was going to travel in Europe, that very first evening, I said to her, will you come with me? I'm traveling to Paris and Berlin and Amsterdam. She said, no, I'm too busy. And I had return ticket to go back to India. And I canceled my ticket. And I said, I'll find this person. And I did not take June's telephone number, or I did not take her address. I don't know how to find her. And then I tried to phone her office where she was working. And she was not going there. She was not well. But after 2 or 3 telephone calls, I found one person in that office, Operation Omega, who gave me June's address. And so without telling her, I went. And she was not well. She was living by herself. I said, you are not well, and nobody is looking after you. So I've come to look after you. I'll make you soup. So I went and bought some cabbage and some onions and made a soup for her. And so that, I think, is my happiest time of life, that I met somebody who has been with me now for 48 years, putting up with me. I'm not easy to live with. Very difficult person. And yet she has managed to live. And we still read poetry together. And that's another happiest moment, when we read poetry together. When I'm at home, every morning, from 7 to 8, we spend time together and read poetry. Love poetry, spiritual poetry, Hafiz, Rumi, William Blake. Many, many books we have read together. Zen, Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, spiritual books, poetic books, we read together. And then we garden together, and we cook together. So that way, we have been living together for 48 years. But meeting that one day in crypt of St. Martin in the Fields, the church in Trafalgar Square, was one of my happiest days.
Thank you.
And I'm still with her.
Thank you. Well done. Now,
maybe we can ask
Guillaume wanted us to talk a little bit about our relationship as father and son.
Okay.
So, how shall we start? Shall I start? Or would you like to start?
You start.
I start. Okay. Well, I know that the family relationships are not always easy. And I always love to hear about other people's problems. It always makes me feel much better. So I wanted to share a little bit about our journey. Satish and my mother worked very hard throughout my childhood. And, you know, maybe there was times when I wanted more and I expected more. And perhaps for a son, you know, Satish has so many good qualities. I was very disappointed when I found out he wasn't perfect and there was things, you know, imperfect about him. So we've sometimes had a bit of struggle. And we had many years, so when I was 16, I started to smoke cigarettes and drink a lot of alcohol, and we were a lot of arguments.
Teenage problems.
Teenage problems. And we worked together successfully. I was marketing manager of the magazine for 5 years, and it was successful. The magazine grew a lot, but we had quite a difficult time for a few years. And then eventually, I sometimes get very upset with Satish flying, for example. But when I sat here today and I listened to Satish, I was crying. And sometimes, Satish, you touch me when I hear you speak. You touch my heart so much, it makes me cry. And so I know you've touched so many hearts all over the world, so I don't really have the right to judge you. But this has been, you know, something that I get very upset of, Satish flying airplanes, etc. So one time we didn't speak for 6 months, and Satish came with June and said, so what are we going to do now? And I said, we need mediation. And Satish said, okay, yes, I'll go to mediation. June said, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So, and we had mediation. We had 3 counseling sessions, and we learned how to talk. And Satish was very kind. I asked Satish about his childhood, and I found that the difficult times, the areas in my life where I felt he was a bit cold to me, I found was the areas, the times related to the times in his life where his mother wasn't there or his father wasn't there. So that listening to his life gave me a lot of understanding and compassion. And then we learned to have a conversation. Whenever one of us gets upset, we ring up the other and say, well, we need to have a conversation. And it's called beginning anew. And in beginning anew, you start with, I say 3 things that I appreciate about Satish. Satish says 3 things he appreciates about me. I say 1 thing that I regret. He says 1 thing he regrets. And then we have a conversation. And that basis, once you've heard those things from the other person, you can talk about quite deep things, and it's very successful. So slowly, by having conversations, and Satish was very kind, he listened to some of the things I was unhappy about in my childhood, etc. So I got them off my chest. And gradually, we started to become really good friends. Until now, you are one of my best friends. I feel very lucky to have you still. So that's my little...
Indian tradition, in the Indian tradition, we say that when the son is grown up and the daughter is grown up, they are no longer your children. They are your friends. So you are my friend. And I believe, and I think truly, that Mukti is much more practically practicing ecological lifestyle, low-carbon lifestyle, more perfectly than I am. So I admire Mukti, more practicing, being the change much more than I. And therefore, some of my old habits and some of my old thinking, and sometimes I find it very difficult to say no to somebody like Vandana Shiva, for example, or somebody who is a very dear friend, and they want me to go and give it, or like even Guillaume. Sometimes I say, Guillaume, I'm getting old, I have been coming every year, maybe next time I'll come every other year or something. But I find it difficult to say, dear friends like Vandana, like Guillaume, to say no to them. And so I go to India by plane. But I do feel not good about it, because I think that Mukti is absolutely right, that we should reduce our carbon emission and reduce our footprint on planet Earth. So I admire Mukti and I agree with Mukti, and I feel that I'm not as practicing and perfectly good low carbon lifestyle as Mukti, and you saw his program, which I totally admire. So this is a kind of little bit of tension that we have, but as Mukti says, we are good friends, and we understand each other, and we forgive each other.
And you touch people's hearts.
Yeah,
You touch my heart, and that, who knows how important that is. I'm learning. I just picked up a book for my travel, and said the book is called Ego is the Enemy. So I'm reading the book, and yes, who am I to judge anybody? So this, hopefully.
Yeah.
And do you have any reflections on our relationship and the time
the thing
healing
is that
our relationship?
I think it is not possible to have all the time a good relationship and not have any difficulties. So the relationship between you and I, whenever there have been difficulties, I've not seen as something negative. I've seen it as it's a part of living, part of growing up. When you are growing up, you have to feel free, you have to think freely, you don't have to say, yes, yes, daddy, all the time, yes, yes, yes. Then you will not be free. And your name is Mukti. Mukti means freedom. And so whenever you and I had difficult time, I thought, this is good that we have some difficult time. It is good that Mukti wants freedom. It is good that he wants to do his own way and not listen all the time and say yes, yes to me. So I have taken those difficult times as a part of living and a part of our relationship, and not think that it should always be smooth, so always should be no problem. That's not life. Life always goes ups and down, and difficulties are part of life, and difficulties make you stronger. If your difficulty between you and I relationship has made us stronger, and our relationship is now deeper. So I don't think I fear or I see difficult relationship as a negative. I think it's a part of growing up, part of becoming strong and more resilient.
Thanks.
We have got about 5 minutes. Have we got about 5 minutes? So maybe if anybody would like to ask any question from the audience. Anybody would like to ask any question to Mukti? Yes, Albert, there.
I was actually asking the question to my friends because I was wondering. So I hope it's not. Yeah, it's. So I was wondering when you were not happy because he was flying on a plane, right? So I wondered, like, in the end, the goal is to reduce the total emissions of carbon on the Earth, right? It doesn't really matter the way, as long as they are reduced, no? So why couldn't you do something like, for example, he could go by plane and he could buy a train ticket to a friend that would take the train ticket instead of flying if they give it to him for free. So the balance is the same, you know? Or he could, you know, I don't know, use a little bit of money to reduce the carbon somehow, like to compensate for this plane. But why would you want specifically that Satish doesn't fly in the plane? Like, wouldn't there be another solution like this?
Maybe, and you're right. I do carbon footprinting and carbon accounting. Actually, Satish's plane ticket, which is 800 kilos of CO2 to come from England to here and back, if it's split between everyone in this room, on your ticket, it's about 2 kilos each. And we're each using about 27 kilos a day, so if it's worth it for everybody here to have Satish come here, 2 kilos each, that's quite manageable.
All of you flying to England.
Yeah. Also, I'm not saying that I'm right in thinking that, but there's sometimes I feel Satish is such an important example, and he has so much influence, like other people as well, that the example is so important now, that the examples are set, that we got to practice not just talk. Now the planet needs us to practice. So I think if Satish, the most famous thing Satish did was walk from India, and that had such an effect. So I think if Satish didn't fly, it would have such an effect. But I'm not saying I'm right. That is what I have sometimes thought.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other question? One more question. Okay, there. There. Keep your arm up. Yeah. Yeah, there.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you so much for coming here with plane or by foot. I'm here with my daughter, and it's absolutely wonderful. I love it here in this surrounding. Something is not really convincing me, which is you're talking about your son being your friend. Your son is your son. My daughter's my daughter. She doesn't belong to me. From the beginning, she never belonged to me. But I still consider her my daughter, and she always will, even if I'm 80 or 90. I think there is quite a difference of a friend and a family member. I don't know.
It depends what you mean by friend and what you mean by son and what you mean by daughter. All these are words, but meaning. When you have, say, this is my son, then there are some expectations. This is my daughter. You have some expectations from your daughter, and daughter has some expectations from you. So there is a kind of expectations, whereas friendship is pure, has no expectations. You are friend because you friend. And there is no, I don't expect Mukti to behave in this way or that way or do this or do that or have a good job or not good job, be successful, not successful. I have no judgment. It's his life. I love him not as my son. I love him as a human being now. I don't have any expectation. But I think that when I say this is my son, and therefore he should be good, he should be successful, he should have this, he should have that, he should behave like this. So those expectations, even I say to my wife, who is now, we are married for 48 years, but I don't say, you are my wife. I always say, you are my friend. So friendship is pure relationship. There's purity. There is no expectation and more acceptance. I accept Mukti as he is, warts and all. Doesn't matter what he, something I don't agree or don't like about him. Doesn't matter. I love him as he is. But when you say my son, there's more expectation. My daughter, my wife, more expectation. So I like to rise above expectations and love Mukti, June, everybody without expectation and without any judgment, without any limit, without any conditions. That's my understanding of friendship. But if you have a different meaning and if you think there is a more intimacy between daughter and mother or son and father, then he is my son, of course. There's no denying about it. And I say to, when Mukti's birthday comes and I write to him a birthday card, or I say, I'm delighted to be your father. This is my honor to be your father. I'm not denying our relationship as a father and son. We are, of course, because that's kind of blood relationship, and that's a kind of, we are. But I want to rise above that expectation. And I don't expect anything. I say, you are you. You do what you want to do. This is your life. And if I want my advice, I give you advice. If you want my help, I'm here. If you want my support, I'm here for you. But I have no control over you. That's all my understanding of friendship. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah.
You want to
Very
say
good.
anything?
Well, I just wanted to say, I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people here will share, but you're 83, you'll be here for many more years, I think, but not forever. And I just wanted to say, for me personally, but on behalf of a lot of people, thank you for being our teacher. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your teachings.
Thank you.
You taught me a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bueno, pues gràcies i fin demà. Que descanseu bé.
Thank you very much. Rest well, and we'll see you here tomorrow. Thank you.
Sí, millor tornar. Sí. Sí.